I would now like to invite up Dr. Eric Watkins, who is our director for the Center for Missions and Evangelism, and I would like to invite Reverend Paul Ipema, who is a professor of ministerial studies and also the director of our ministerial apprenticeship program. And I'd like to invite up Reverend Andrea Ferrari. He's here, pastor in Perugia, Italy, and also Bryce Klassen. Bryce is twice as nice, I always like to say. Bryce is a current student at Mid-America, and so he had a really interesting experience over the summer, and we're going to let these guys talk about that. But it's a internship that Bryce had with the Center for Missions and Evangelism. I'm going to let you guys take off. I'm going to go find a seat in the pew and take this in myself. So, adios. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to begin by reading from 2 Timothy 2. You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. If you would look inside the program that we've got for our conference this weekend, and you can get past the very unsightly top left picture, which is proof that cavemen can teach in seminaries. There is a four-cornered overview of what the Center for Missions and Evangelism at Mid-America does. And so part of that is contributing new classes related to subjects like we're talking about this weekend, conferences like the one you're attending right now, cohorts for church leadership that want to engage these subjects more intimately. And then finally, what we're going to talk about now is the internship component to the Center for Missions and Evangelism. And I'll only say a couple things before kicking that discussion off. Some things are caught and some things are taught. Many things related to pastoral ministry are taught in a classroom. A lot of things are caught in the sense of being modeled and in a context of discipleship. And as a young aspiring minister, I had the privilege of doing a summer-long internship and then a year-long internship, and 23 years later, I would love to do another internship. So we're going to talk about that subject, and I want to kick it off by asking Reverend Ipema to talk a little bit about his work as the MAP director, and from your point of view as a URCNA minister, tell us about the importance of pastoral internships.
The ministerial apprenticeship program functions on the basis of a philosophy of ministry, a philosophy of theological education that believes that there should be an interaction between what is taught in the classroom and what is practiced in the field, in the ministry, among people, and with experienced mentors, pastors who will serve to train and to guide those who aspire to pastoral ministry. Let me tell you a story that I think fleshes out why I think the ministerial apprenticeship program at Mid-America Reformed Seminary is so important and why I believe the Lord has called me to this work. I have been a pastor now as of last month for 30 years, and I've participated in numerous candidacy and ordination examinations in the URC. And it always strikes me, from time to time, I will have, usually it's little old ladies that will come up to me and say, with a rather angry look in their face, they'd say to me, "Why must you pastors be so tough on these young men when they're being examined?" They feel sorry for these guys. And finally, I have responded not only to individual people, but I've given speeches on the floor of classes in which I say, why is it that we want rigorous examinations, rigorous training for our electricians and plumbers, our carpenters, our doctors, our pilots, all of those things, our accountants. My daughter's a CPA, and I remember how rigorous her examination was. Well, I think the answer is pretty evident. We want them to demonstrate competency. And in many cases, the pilot, you don't just want a guy who says, well, I'd really like to fly a plane. Doesn't matter really how skillful I am at this or if I know what I'm doing with the panel of instruments. I just want to fly. We say, no, you have to learn how to fly, how to operate the controls. You need X number of hours before you can even begin to fly on your own, et cetera, et cetera. I said, why is it that we want all these rigorous sort of expectations for those in those vocations, but when it comes to the ministry, we feel sorry that these students have to undergo an examination at classes and maybe an additional examination at ordination. I believe that with our program at Mid-America, we actually enhance what takes place in the classroom by giving our students experience in the field where they can apply what's been taught in a way where a mentor can guide them, direct them, show them areas where there's growth needed, where they need to change, they need to mature, they need to work on not only ministry skills, but also spiritual development as well as academic and intellectual development. All those things are important, and they serve to enhance one another. Having students go out into the ministry helps the individual churches. It serves a role in terms of assisting pastors, relieving some of the responsibilities, but in particular, it's important that we see that relationship between the classroom and the ministry field. And so that really is the heart and soul of the ministerial apprenticeship program, not just for internships, but for those of you who are interested in ministry, we assign our students already when they first arrive. They're assigned a supervising pastor from a local church. They teach catechism. They can teach other educational ministry programs. They participate in evangelism. They can assist with worship. They'll exhort when they're in their second and third year. I'm encouraging students at Mid-America to come with me when I do chapel at the Danville Correctional Center prison in Danville, Illinois. I do that twice a month, just if for no other reason than to learn, like Pastor Murphy was talking about, learning how to speak or have a conversation with someone who knows nothing about the Bible. Those are all important things. And certainly we don't want to simply send a guy to seminary and have all of his instruction being exclusively within the classroom, and then, as it were, sending him out without having any sort of experience whatsoever. I think we believe that both of those things are important in the training and preparation for men for gospel ministry.
Thank you. So let me tee up what I want to say and ask of Reverend Ferrari and Bryce. So they represent the first of a kind in the sense that they have done together our first CME internship when Bryce went over to Italy. He's really suffering for the kingdom, to do a summer-long internship with Reverend Ferrari. One of the nuances about the CME internships is that they're intentionally focused on partnering or pairing a student like Bryce with someone who is active on the mission field, whether that is church planting or foreign missions. So you should think in your mind, you have brick and mortar internships with established churches that have been around for a long time, and those are very important. Our heart for the local church is very strong. But more and more, as you're sensing just in the conversation, and you know this just looking around, that even pastors of brick and mortar churches now more and more have to think like missionaries. Right, like the nations have moved into our backyard, and some of the challenges of the mission field are just in front of us. And so we even want guys going back to pastor brick and mortar internships to get more and more exposure to the life and ministry of men serving and families serving on the mission field. So now I want to direct a question to Reverend Ferrari, who when he begins talking, you'll immediately experience what I did when we had dinner last night, which is a little tinge of jealousy. He has a fantastic accent that has what I call the Sinclair Ferguson effect. He could be talking about the circumference of tires, and I would feel like I'm having a deep, moving spiritual experience. So Andrea, tell us about your work in Italy, how the Lord called you there, how long you've been there, and what you're focusing on right now.
I've been a pastor for...
Hold on a second. Try again.
I've been a pastor for 30 years, 32 actually. I was ordained in 1992. I was very, very young. And I worked in the south of Italy for 10 years. then 16 years in the north, where I was born, in the city of Milan, and now I've been working to plant a new church in central Italy, in the city of Perugia. And in these 3 decades, the society in Italy changed a lot. Human life is different today than when I first entered the Christian ministry, and so it is more difficult today to do evangelism and to speak with people about religious things, even in our Roman Catholic culture in Italy. I'm focusing on church planting because I think that church planting is very important. Not only doing evangelism is important, but we do evangelism to build the church, to build churches. And so in our experience, even if we tried many evangelistic approaches to reach people with the gospel, we find that trying to establish friendships with people and cultivate relationships is the best way to evangelize people, to share the gospel with them, waiting for a work of the Holy Spirit, as we heard this morning, well, actually this afternoon. So, in my experience in Milan, we began with 6 families. We were 14 adults and 6 children. And after 15 years, we had 55 members in the church, adults and teenagers and children. Now in Perugia, things are even slower because we had 3 years of COVID, and so things went very slow. Someone else said that we need time. So we need time to establish relationships with people, and so this is what we are trying to do: invest our time to be with people, and of course this is a reflection of the doctrine of the incarnation. Christ came as a man, so to be with us, God with us. So we try to apply the doctrine of the incarnation of the Son of God in a missionary way, in a missiological way. And so this is basically what we do. One thing that is speaking about hospitality, one thing that I like in our church is that we have people, friends and relatives that usually don't come to church, but when we have a fellowship meal, they come and they join us, and they feel being part of our small church, and that's encouraging, because you develop a relationship with them, and even though they are not aware, they absorb the gospel in some measure. And so this is what Bryce has been exposed to in the last summer. We have a very small congregation, so it was very simple what we did together. But also I think it was meaningful for us, and I hope also for Bryce himself.
So Bryce, tell us about your call to ministry and why foreign missions.
Yeah, so long story short, this is the Coles Notes version. A couple years ago when the war broke out in Ukraine, I actually went to Eastern Europe and I got involved with humanitarian efforts. And so we were driving supply vans into Ukraine, and then Ukrainian refugees, women and children who were forced to flee through Poland and into Lithuania. And at this time in my life, I was really actually questioning not just I wasn't even thinking about missions at the time. I was questioning my call to ministry in general. But after 2 weeks of being there in Lithuania, I met a missionary, Reverend Van Dalen of the ARP, and he's been laboring there in Lithuania for almost 10 years now. And it felt like kind of like a Jonah experience. I left, I flew halfway around the world, and God was waiting for me there, and he asked me if I wanted to serve in European missions. And so I ended up staying there for 6 months. I met Reverend Vanderhart while I was there. I actually drove up to Riga because he was teaching at the Baltic Seminary. Got in touch with Mars. We met Richard Bout. He came to visit us as well, and I started school at Mid-America in 2023, January of 2023. If you want to know more about the Eastern Europe field, you can talk to COA. They've been involved there, doing work there, laboring there for decades, and so they know far more about it than I. So that's just to say that it was through that the Lord put that burden on my heart for missions, specifically for European missions. And then in January, Reverend Ipema mentioned Italy to me, and that there was an opportunity there. And I didn't have any reason to say no. And then I had a wonderful summer and experience with Reverend Ferrari in Italy, and it really solidified that burden for missions.
Paul, when you think about these types of internships, who gets the most out of them, the pastor, the church, or the intern?
I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. I think everyone benefits from it. And the way in which they benefit vary significantly. Sometimes students benefit by learning things the hard way. They learn what they need to work on. They learn what they're either poor at or what certainly needs further development. But sometimes it's an overwhelming success. They're well received, and it's an affirmation of their calling. But the pastors also, I think, find a great benefit, a blessing of being a mentor to a man who aspires to the gospel ministry, sharing, again, as we heard earlier from Dr. Compton, not the horror stories about ministry, but about, the challenges, yes, but also the blessings and the seriousness of the call and what things ought to be considered as we aspire to the ministry. My pastor had said to me, when I first told him as a high schooler that I was thinking about the ministry, he says, I will try talking you out of it as much as I can, and if I can't do that, then you ought to pursue the ministry. I don't know that I've taken that approach as a pastor, but I think it's something certainly that can be addressed in that relationship between a mentor and a student. And then also the churches obviously are blessed through the ministry, and I think churches benefit especially when they can give feedback, helpful feedback, constructive feedback, where they can participate in the process of training and enhancing that student's preparedness for ministry.
Great. Andrea, what kind of time did you spend with Bryce, and looking back at it, how did having an intern as a foreign missionary benefit you and the people you're serving there? what kind of time, like we were talking about last night at dinner, what kind of time did you and Bryce spend together? What kind of things were you doing? And how did that benefit you? How did the internship benefit you and the people you're serving in Perugia?
Well, very simply, I didn't feel alone. That was to have someone I could speak to about theology, about the challenges of the Christian ministry, someone with whom just to read something concerning pastoral theology. That was a great blessing to me, a great benefit I received. And to have 2 afternoons every week set aside to think about something especially related to the life of the pastor was, and to be able to share that experience with someone else, that was a great benefit for me. Yes, and also the congregation received encouragement to have a younger man to listen another person preaching. That was very beneficial for them, and also an encouragement, because in a small church plant effort, to have someone coming for 3 months to stay with us was a great blessing.
Bryce, I'd like to hear from you some of the benefits that you got from the internship. And I think we're all wondering now, given how good the food is in Italy and how hospitable Reverend Ferrari is known to be, how did you stay so skinny?
Lots of walking. Yeah.
And benefits, I know. Benefits from the internship.
I'm getting hungry, so.
Yeah.
So maybe just, I was talking with you about this a little bit earlier. I wanted to maybe take this time to make an appeal for European missions. One thing that I learned about being, not just in Lithuania, but in Italy, is that God is there. And God is there. And sometimes, and the reason I say that is because sometimes we talk about Europe as if he's not there. We talk about Europe as, Ezekiel's, you remember Ezekiel's vision in Ezekiel chapter 9, the glory of the Lord, departing from the temple. And we talk about Europe that way, that the glory of the Lord has left Europe. Europe had her chance, and she blew it. And so now we need to invest our time and our efforts and our resources in these other places. But God has not left Europe. And near the end of my time in Italy, Reverend Ferrari and I hiked a mountain, one of the Sibillini Mountains. I did not have any sunscreen, which is a big mistake. And by the time I got down at the end of the day, I was redder than this chair. It was horrible. I couldn't move. I was stiff as a board. So it's funny now, painful at the time. But on the other side of that mountain, there's this little lake called Lago di Pilato, literally the Lake of Pilate, Pilate's Lake. It's called that because legend has it that that's where Pontius Pilate was killed and buried. Now, I was super thirsty. I had gone through most of my water. There was nothing I would have liked more than to dunk my head into that lake. But it was completely dry. There was not a drop of water there. And sometimes, Europe and European missions can feel like that. It's dry, it's arid, spiritually dry. And it's easy to get discouraged. But a few days later, it rained. And then it rained again. And that lake is full right now. And God is inviting us to partake of some. I believe that God is not done with Europe. I believe that it's going to rain again. and that God is inviting us to partake of that. And so I would just encourage you to consider supporting the efforts that are going on in Europe and in Italy. So thank you.
Andrea, I'm going to come back to you and ask, you're a full-time missionary, one of the more beautiful places in the world. And all kidding aside, similar to what Bryce was just speaking to, what would you say to young people here to get them to encourage going to the mission field as guys like us get older and start to think about, who's going to run with the baton next? What would you say to a crowd like this, mixed with especially some young people, to get them to consider the mission field?
Well,
swallow the mic.
It's difficult. I'm thinking to the ending of Matthew chapter 9. Jesus looked at the crowds, and to him, what he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. So, and he had compassion on them. So what I would say to young people, of course, is first of all to apply Christ's exhortation to pray for laborers, but also to think if in terms of themselves being possibly called to be among those laborers. And in Italy and in Europe, there are many opportunities for being exposed to missions experiences for a short time, a longer time, and possibly for a lifetime. So I would say to young people, don't think about Europe just a beautiful place for a vacation or a cultural experience, or Italy as a place for a culinary experience, but for a spiritual experience. And we welcome young people who want to spend some time with us, a few months. We had university students coming to our universities for 1 semester, 2 semesters, and from various nations in the world. So that's a possibility too, as well.
Paul, one last question for you, and then I'm going to make a closing comment here because I know we're at the dinner hour, and all this talk about Italian food probably has you thinking of only one thing. And we do have Italian on the menu, but whether it's tonight or tomorrow, I'll let that be a surprise for you. Paul, there are probably men, pastors, elders in the room here who have had interns. There's some that probably never have, and maybe think of this as kind of off their radar. What would you say to someone, pastor, elders, church leaders here, who've never had an intern, to maybe encourage them that this is something they not only can do, but regards discipling the next generation into the pulpit, something they ought to do?
Well, I think you summarized it. I mean, that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to equip the next generation of pastoral leaders, of ministers of the gospel, of shepherds of God's people. And the churches play an important role in that. The seminary does as well, but the churches play a large role in that. And I would encourage pastors and elders among us this afternoon who have not participated in an internship program to discuss it at a council or session meeting about the viability of doing that, how it can be done, or perhaps even simply supervising a student during the course of an academic year. I've encouraged our students, and I've encouraged supervising pastors to have students participate in things like pastoral visits, to see from an experienced pastor, how do you make a pastoral visit? to witness or even participate in a funeral service, assisting a pastor there. But whatever the case may be, in whatever capacity, I think it's an investment that you are making in the future leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ. And I don't think there would be any disagreement in this body here that we all recognize how important that is. So I would encourage you, by all means, to think about it, to pray about it, to discuss it amongst yourselves.
So that's really helpful, and I want to use that to just get in a last little, not simply comment here, but actually a plea. Let me be unambiguous, a prayerful request. Seminaries can only do so much, and my brother just said it really well. There's a significant sense in which training up the next generation of pastors really is the work of the church. Seminary can't do it. There's only some things you can learn in a classroom. Many things are taught, and many things are caught. And we want those that are going on in the mission field and planting churches and pastoring local congregations to be well trained for the ministry. One reality that you should think about, Bryce here is just a starving young single seminary student, and Andrea is a full-time missionary over in Europe. When you think about it, which of them is capable of funding a full-time internship? You have students who are willing to go. We have a wonderful looking list of church planters, willing missionaries that would take a seminary student. But the reality is it takes money for someone to go and live someplace for a season, whether it's for a summer or for a year. So at the risk of being bold and prayerfully ambitious, because the Lord's arm is not short, I would love to ask you to prayerfully consider giving to the CME internship fund as something distinct from what you may already consider doing for the seminary. And the reason why is exactly what you see up here. We want more and more internships like this to be possible. And let me go crazy bold. I remember being at Ligonier a handful of years ago, and I learned a phrase I'd never heard of because I grew up, kind of poor, and I'm in the OPC, which is kind of the same thing. Come on, I mean, it was pretty good. All right. So anyway, I remember hearing Chris Larson talk about their project for building Reformation Bible College, and he said he hoped for a transition donor. And he said very gently, he's like, I would love to see, anyone who's able to give anything they can to this project, do so. And I would encourage you, if you can give $10 to the CME internship fund, you know what the Widows Mite does? It encourages people that widows are behind the work of the church, right? Small checks are a big deal, but big checks are helpful too. And a transition donor could do something crazy, like donate, you're going to laugh when I say this, but I mean it seriously, $1 million to the CME internship fund, so that off the yield, the interest of that, every year we could send 2 to 4 interns out and not deplete it. It'd be something kind of like an endowment. And that is what I'm hoping the Lord will provide for the CME internship fund. It doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit the faculty. It doesn't go to anybody's salary. It simply sends guys like Bryce to work with men like Andrea in the mission field, and it would be an exciting thing for the church. Many of you that might not be interested in church planting foreign missions, you're in congregations, and someday your pastor's going to retire, or your congregation may be vacant even now. Where do you think those guys come from? Right? They don't just fall off trees. They're raised up in Sunday school classes, catechism, they sit on pews, they're in family worship. By God's grace, they sense a call, they come to seminary. We want to send them to you well equipped for the ministry as we understand it now and with the challenges that are ahead. So you may not feel called to go to the mission field, but we're all called to the mission in one way or another. We're either sending or we are being sent. So pray to the Lord of the harvest, and let's trust that God will answer those prayers.